and joining us. We have a jam-packed lineup, and I do appreciate you all coming into this session, because with it being London Climate Action Week, there's lots and lots of things going on this week, which I'm sure you're all either kind of dipping your toe into. So I will quickly run through the agenda if you just want to jump to the next slide, Zara. So really pleased to be joined by my colleague Zara Scott, who's Camden's Climate Resilience Officer, and she's leading on Camden's forthcoming resilience plan. And she's going to be talking to us a little bit about what climate resilience is, why we're talking about it now, and how businesses can plan for it. I'm also really delighted to be joined by Dan Johnson, who is founder of Placemaking London, and he's going to be talking about an ongoing piece of work that he's been delivering with the Fitzrovia Partnership, a local business improvement district in Camden, and that's otherwise known as the Fitzrovia Village Strategy. So Dan's going to be talking a little bit about some of the resilience measures that have been incorporated into the design of that plan, and then also drawing on some other examples from the other pieces of work that Dan has been working on. So we've got some time for some Q&A after Dan's session, but in terms of housekeeping, please do use the chat function. Do share your reflections, your comments, any queries, and we'll address those as we're working through the session. And I think that's probably everything from a housekeeping aspect. So let's kick off. Next slide, please, Zara. So just a quick hello from the Camden Climate Alliance. I know quite a lot of people that are on the call, which is great. But for those that don't know me, my name is Abby Roberts, and I lead the Camden Climate Alliance. And it is a sustainability network for businesses, third sector, and schools, and all those organisations essentially coming together and driving change on sustainability. So we have such a varied network of over 400 organisations, varying sizes, varying sectors, but all working towards sort of the net zero target. And a lot of our work is really centred around how can we support businesses reduce their carbon footprint, but also how can we enable local climate action through local partnership working. Next slide, please, Sarah. So just a little bit about London Climate Action Week, if you're not all bored to death of hearing about it already. Appreciate some of you might have been in some other sessions. London Climate Action Week is in its 5th year this year, and really essentially it aims to bring together everyone across London, stakeholders with varying different interests, to really create a global movement that accelerates a fair and inclusive climate transition. And there's lots of events that are taking place this week, and they've all really been themed around these 4 key areas that we have listed on the screen. So essentially accelerating the global clean economy, and that's really thinking about sort of the energy security challenges and looking at how we can increase clean technology. We then have delivering fair, inclusive and just transitions. And this is the one that really relates to what we're talking about today. So we're looking at how these climate transitions can both sort of address mitigation and adaptation, both within countries and across countries as well. So that's really kind of the theme that we're focusing on today in this session. And then the other themes are expanding networks for whole society action and creating a greener London for Londoners, as we do have a net zero 2030 target that the Mayor of London has put in place. And we also in Camden have a net zero 2030 target that we're working towards as well. So that just helps to sort of set the context for why we're talking about what we're talking about and why we're doing it in an important week such as this. Next slide, Zara. Just to help contextualize sort of our discussions today, I just wanted to sort of include this this sort of graph on the slides, and I did wonder if anyone wanted to volunteer if they had any ideas about what this meant, or if they've seen it before. So I would encourage anyone to drop something in the chat function, or just unmute and tell me if you think you know what this is or what it's trying to show us.
It's the average temperature change from the mean from between those 2 periods.
Brilliant. Thanks, Amelia, and thanks for contributing there. Yeah, so this is the UK annual temperature from dating back to 1884 to sort of 2020. And what we can see is that the last sort of 5 years have been the warmest 5 years on record, and sort of our last coolest year dated back to 1919. So we really are in a period of extreme kind of warming, which is then translating through to increased hazards, more extreme weather patterns, and that is obviously incredibly problematic. So just wanted to include that there to kind of help contextualize our session today. And I'm now going to hand over to Zara, who is going to kick us off with our first poll. So we're doing a little bit of interaction today.
Good morning. Yeah, just a quick heads up, I can't see Teams at the minute, so Abby, if you can just keep an eye on that would be great. And if there's any kind of hands up, feel free just to give me a shout. But yes, good morning everyone. I'm Zara Scott. I'm the Climate Resilience Officer for Camden, and as Abby said earlier, I'm currently working on the Climate Resilience Plan that we're hoping to be launching later this year. So just before we kind of get started and kind of delve into what climate resilience is and what's kind of going on in the borough and a bit wider, we just wanted to start off kind of gauging the understanding from yourselves of what you understand climate resilience to be, and whether or not you think it's something that can be implemented in your business. So there should be a little poll popping up in the chat function soon. So if you can just keep an eye, open that up, and once it's there, cast your votes and we'll have a quick look to see the outcome.
Yeah, that's in the chat function now for everyone. So hopefully you can start capturing those votes. Great, seeing lots of responses already. Those responses slowly creeping up, which is great. A lot on the call agreeing that they do have an understanding of what climate resilience is and how this could be implemented, which is great to see. We have one disagree, but I'm hoping by the end of this session we'll get that turned into an agree. We'll strongly agree. Okay, brilliant. Yeah, that's jumping up. 15 responses. Yeah, lots of you agreeing, which is fantastic. Great. I think over to you, Zara.
Perfect. So yeah, just a little bit of background as to what kind of climate resilience is. So the risk, obviously, of climate change is rapidly increasing. So we're having to really respond to that. And one way that we have been doing it previously is kind of mitigating that to just try and slow or even stop the impacts of climate change. Where resilience and adaptation is a little bit different is we're really trying to kind of preempt the impacts and respond to that now rather than waiting for these events to happen and then reactively respond. So resilience is kind of being able to manage and cope with these events and trying to minimize the disturbances. So whether that's through the recovery following an event or kind of during, making sure that we're prepared. And adaptation is very similar. It's kind of changing how we prepare within our kind of physical realm and just kind of managing and navigating the impacts that we're seeing going forward. So yeah, like I just mentioned, it does link closely with what mitigation is and what many kind of businesses are currently doing. So mitigation generally revolves around the kind of net zero commitments that we've got, which Abby mentioned. There's the 2030 net zero carbon emissions kind of for the UK and in Camden. So a lot of organisations are trying to kind of minimise their output of carbon emissions and just reduce the greenhouse gases in aims to slow the impacts that are currently happening. That is still a very important piece of work that we need to keep working towards. In Camden, we've got the Climate Action Plan, which is focused on that, but it has kind of been acknowledged now that we do need to start thinking a little bit more broadly and kind of, being a bit more proactive in what we're doing to prepare and become resilient to these types of events. And as businesses, particularly within Camden, you guys are all going to be part of that journey, hopefully, making sure that not only the borough as a whole is resilient and can kind of deal with these events as they kind of intensify and become a bit more frequent, but also making sure that your businesses don't suffer as much as maybe they have in the past. So yeah, that's where we're at with the mitigation and goals. So just a little bit about the risk specifically in Camden. I'm assuming a lot of you guys are based within the Camden area, so you probably have seen some of these impacts already. But some of the work that we've been doing recently is to try and understand these risks to help kind of navigate it going forward. So over the recent years, we've kind of had a few flooding events. So back in July 2021, we had a major flooding event. We had overheating last year in summer, and then this year again, we've seen that kind of heat wave maybe 2 weeks ago, which has kind of only just seemed to kind of fizzle out now. Kind of cold winters, which have caused disruptions, and then a few kind of other events which maybe we haven't seen as much, but just extreme storms. So we haven't really seen that, but that's definitely a potential risk that we need to take into consideration and how that might impact us. Water scarcity, I think in Camden we've been quite fortunate. We've not really had too many drought warnings, maybe last year during the heat wave, but that definitely could intensify as we carry on. And then fire. So, I mean, again, not in Camden last year with the heat waves, but we did kind of see the fire risks in Kent last year, and obviously globally, we've seen that more recently as well. So yeah, just a little bit about kind of Camden in the news, highlighting some of the issues that we have seen. So like I mentioned, in 2021, July 2021, we had a storm which impacted residents and businesses. So across the borough, we've seen around 100 residential properties flooded and approximately 12 businesses. So yeah, that was all based on kind of rainfall and that water just not really having anywhere to go, whether it's pooling on the roads or not being able to get kind of down the drainage system. So just a few headlines about that. We've got the heatwave travel disruptions, which has kind of caused issues with the train lines and people getting around. Yeah, being asked not to kind of use barbecues in open spaces for fire risks. And then back in December, although it wasn't classed as kind of a climate flood event, we did see a burst water main within Camden, which was put down to kind of the cold snap. So kind of a little different to the flooding we've seen in 2021, but yeah, still definitely related to the climate changes that we're seeing across Camden. So yeah, a little bit about what we're doing as Camden Council currently. So there's lots of work going on, as I mentioned, we've been working on mitigation for a lot of years, since 2019, where the declaration of an emergency came into place. But we're really trying to take the resilience to the next level across the borough. So there's a few things that we're already doing. We're kind of implementing sustainable drainage across the borough. So you might have seen kind of pocket parks appearing, or rain gardens, or maybe just grass verges that haven't been there before. A lot of these have been put in with the intention of stopping or slowing flow. So these kind of rain gardens that you can see an image just on the screen, absorb some of that water, and just means that it's not having to take up space somewhere else, so potentially reducing that flooding. So there's a lot of that type of work going on. A lot of kind of greening projects as well. So planting new trees, whether that's mature trees or kind of shrubs to reduce the heating impacts, as well as kind of having that core benefit of absorbing emissions. Generally, we're just trying to redesign our public space to be a bit more prepared, and we're also working with community groups to make sure that, especially in the high risk areas, they feel like they can be prepared and know kind of what to do if an emergency does occur. Similarly, yeah, we've got a lot of green infrastructure going on. That's kind of something that's ramping up within the council, and then we're collaborating with people like yourselves, educating on kind of the issues, but also wider as well. So speaking to different boroughs, different community groups, schools, all that kind of stuff, just to really embed it within the way that we live in Camden. And yes, like we've already said a couple of times, one of the big things that we are doing within Camden Council at the minute is the development of our first climate resilience plan, which we're hoping to launch later this year. So that's really exciting. It's kind of looking at the whole of Camden, understanding the risks and the impacts, and just really taking a wider view of what we feel we can do as a business, as an organisation, but also taking the opportunity to kind of look at how our businesses, our communities are already responding, and just work with you guys to make sure that we're really going on this journey together to make a more resilient Camden. So now I think I'm going to hand over to Dan for the Fitzrovia. I will stop sharing and allow you to kind of come in.
Dan, you've got presenting rights, so hopefully that should all work for you on your end.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Abby. Just take a moment to open this up. Okay, can everybody see the screen? Can they see the slide?
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah, we've got that.
here.
Thanks, Dan.
Right, brilliant. Good. Okay, well, that's a good start. So thanks very much. Great introduction. It's really good to be here. We've worked with the Fitzrovia Partnership, which, as Abby said in the introduction, is a business improvement district. It represents about 200 businesses in the area, and it collects a levy from those businesses and delivers services on their behalf in the area. And a bid enables businesses to come together and deliver things that individually they can't deliver on their own. So we were commissioned alongside Arup, which has been a really great journey and great team to work with in developing a new public realm and place shaping strategy for the area. And as ever with place shaping strategies, they need to achieve a number of objectives, which I'll come on to in a moment. This is a very simple overview of the Fitzrovia area. So the red line around the bid boundary. And you may have seen in one of Zara's slides that Euston Road, I think, is probably the most polluted road in London, if not the whole of the UK. So the bid goes right up to Euston Road and then down to Oxford Street in the south. Those different colours on the plan there show the ground floor land uses. So generally in the northwest of the borough of the bid area, it's more residential. And then as you go further south, it becomes a lot more commercial in its mixes, and actually right in the south becomes a lot more retail focused. Here's some images of Fitzrovia, very mixed, really exciting area, but we start on the top left-hand corner. Lots of challenges there. So retail struggling a little bit, a number of units are closed. Issues with place management, rubbish, graffiti, litter on the streets. The second image at the top, that's Warren Street, and that really shows a number of challenges, but particularly the sense of personal safety at night time. And then moving down to the bottom right hand corner, it's a very green area of Camden. Really beautiful public spaces. And the residents and business in the area really kind of own that and started to green their own streets with planters and so on. And it's a really nice place where people like to visit in terms of the architecture, the arts offer in the area, and also the outdoor dining. So we've talked a little bit about flooding, and so we produced with Arup a flood risk map for the area, and this will only get worse as time goes on due to climate change. So it shows the areas that are more likely to be affected by high incidences of flooding or standing water. So that's one of the issues that we wanted to address with this overarching strategy for the area. And then looking at the areas and overall, we recognise some incredible opportunities with the public realm. And the public realm, the spaces between the buildings, increasingly needs to work harder and harder. In the old days, it used to be just about walking around and access. but particularly in the West End, people expect to be entertained, thrilled by their public spaces, but also on a functional level, they need to work a lot more in terms of access, sustainable transport access, cycling, walking, but also the kind of issues that we're talking about this week, climate change, addressing that. So there's incredible opportunities here to really introduce things like rain gardens, more trees in the area to mitigate the impacts of climate change. So some of the work we did was to really identify the issues in the area. So it's the first column here. So dark streets, lack of wayfinding, sensor crime, improving key routes for all traffic. There's great open spaces, but some of them are hidden away, outdoor dining, street markets. And those two that we've circled are only going to increase in terms of their importance, exposure to extreme wet weather, so sun exposure and risk of flooding, two that we really highlighted we wanted to address through this strategy. Zara's talked about the difference between mitigation, resilience and adaptation. What we like to do as much as possible is through the interventions is address all three as much as possible, and there are ways of doing that. And here's a really nice graph here that shows some of the impacts. And again, Zara talked about these before in the earlier presentation. But we're going to see things like overheating, flooding, impact on plant life, impact on the performance of businesses. So sort of things that we really want to address through. So what does it really mean, and how can we learn from previous projects? These are examples from Brisbane, where shade is naturally built into public realm schemes. So the first image on the left-hand side, that's their arts quarter called the South Bank. It's a really elegant way of building planting in, and that provides shade there for people in that area. The second image at the bottom with the people there who are seated, again, shade is naturally built in, and beyond that there's outdoor dining. Again, shade is a natural part of how things are provided in Brisbane. And the top image there is of a new cycle route, a bridge that's built across the river there, so it's all part of getting ready for the Olympic Games. So again, naturally shade is built in to that. So these are the sort of considerations that we're now having to build into our projects in London. Here's an example from another part of London, which I really like. This is Vauxhall Walk in Lambeth. So the first image is when the scheme was built. It's a beautiful rain garden, but it works really, really very hard. What it did provide was a new cycle route, cycle parking, cycle hire docking stations, and a rain garden as well. And the second image shows that the same scheme, but about 5 years later. So you can see how it's really matured. It works really well in terms of planting, absorbing rainwater, and really quite an elegant space as well. So going back to the Fitzrovia place shaping strategy, identified an overarching vision and 4 really key objectives. We wanted it to be a greener, more connected, livable and safe neighbourhood that celebrates its incredible identity and heritage. We really want to work with the communities, empower the communities to deliver change and improvement with us. As a really thriving daytime and evening economy, we want to make sure that continues into the future. And fourthly, and really importantly, contribute to climate resilience and net zero carbon pathways. So engagement with communities identified, and this is so helpful, the top thing that everyone wants to see in the air is more greening. So by introducing climate resilience measures, the local community are going to be with us on this. Everybody supports, it's in very high levels of support. So it's a really good starting position. So the sort of things we want to deliver, there's a series of public realm projects in the place strategy. And the first one we're illustrating here is Warren Street. So image there, photograph how Warren Street is today. It's not a particularly inviting space. Lots of challenges on that street, and not very green as well at the gateway with Tottenham Court Road. So really want to change that. Introduce a shared space, lots of planting out there, lots of seating, so it works for everyone. It becomes a really enjoyable place to be in, but it also contributes to climate resilience as well. Second one here, this is Chitty Street, which is just off Fitzroy Street. Really, you know, it's a very ordinary side street, not much going on, hardly any traffic. So we've identified this as a really amazing opportunity to take the traffic out, create a new park for local people and everybody in the area. And again, you know, it'll be a green space, so really contributes to our climate change objectives as well. And then Charlotte Street, again, there's a photograph here how Charlotte Street looks today, and we have the opportunity to change this. Really, you know, it's a great place, really beautiful cafes, restaurants there, really lovely place to visit. So we're working on introducing this really elegant public realm scheme, which are almost certainly be traffic free on a time basis, with access for deliveries in the mornings, and you know, really creating this better space. So it's really borrowing those ideas that I showed earlier from Brisbane, where we're creating space, shade, in terms of where people can sit outdoors and enjoy the dining offer as well. And then Cleveland Street, this is another one of our priority projects. Again, the photograph shows how it is today. You know, it's a bit of a hidden street in Fitzrovia. It's a really important cycle route actually from north-south. But again, you know, great opportunity to intensify greening on this street, which has all the climate benefits, but also creates a better environment where people want to visit, spend more time there, and that's also great for the businesses as well. So again, these kind of co-benefits by investing in these places. And that's my final slide. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much for that, Dan. Really interesting to see sort of the works being proposed, and especially the visuals with that as well. And great to see sort of how those priorities are coming through from the community, and to see that sort of those climate resilience measures are naturally sort of falling within the top without necessarily being a real conscious effort to sort of incorporate climate resilience. I just wanted to quickly open up any questions for Dan following his presentation, and just put that to the audience if there was anything.
Can I ask a question actually?
Obviously a brilliant conversation, brilliant presentation, Dan. Oh, we've got Jackson's hand up.
Hi everyone. Hi Dan. Thank you very much for the presentation. Just a quick question, really. I wondered, now that the strategy's been drawn up, have you got any plans for sort of next steps, and have made any thoughts about how some of those schemes might be delivered in the public realm? But yeah, thanks very much for the presentation.
Thanks for the question, Jackson. I think probably everybody knows it's more difficult to deliver public realm cycling, walking projects now because there's generally less funding available, and the way that TfL is funded has changed, and they still have, it's better than it was 2 years ago. They have relatively short-term funding settlements, and I think TfL's current funding settlement ends early next year. So it makes it very difficult to invest in these projects. Generally, how they are delivered and funded is through partnership. So the ones I've worked on would have funding from the local authority. They would have voluntary contributions from the long-term businesses in the area that understand the benefit of investing, and there'll be some TfL investment as well. And that is still is the case. It's just a little bit harder to raise the funding. In terms of next steps, we are setting up a series of co-design steering groups at each of those priority projects. So those who have a direct interest can get around the table, and we collaborate in resolving those challenges, and taking it forward through its design stages, raising the funding. Actually, we start next week. We're actually on site with the Camden team, the Camden transport team, looking at Charlotte Street. So that's great. It's cracking on, which is always really good.
Great, thanks so much for that, Dan. We just had a couple of questions that came through in the chat function as well. So a question around when was the Fitzrovia strategy first implemented? And then another question around how many residents were engaged in the consultation?
Okay, so the strategy has not been implemented. So tomorrow engagement closes on the draft version of the strategy. So we still welcome comments, and it's on the Fitzrovia Partnerships website. There's been a very long period of engagement. I think it's almost been 6 months, because we really wanted to reach out to as many different people and communities as possible. And the approach going forward is that it will always be a live document. So, you know, as situations changes, new projects come forward, or communities get different ideas, the strategy can be adapted. In terms of who we reached out to, I mean, it's a number of resident groups. I mean, the Fitzrovia Neighbourhood Forum, Fitz West Neighbourhood Forum are brilliant, providing a great set of comments. Really welcome those. And we engaged with some other resident groups as well. In terms of the approach for reaching out to residents, it was widely publicised with QR codes, so we went to all the local kind of cafes and shops and made sure that people could really see this. That's something that we wanted to do. We wanted to do it with the different communities. Very conscious that Fitzrovia is one of those. It's very mixed area, you know, lots, as I showed on the early plan, lots of residential properties, lots of residents have a really, quite rightly, a strong sense of ownership over their area, and it's also commercial as well. So it's getting that right and really carefully listening, and it hasn't ended. So that approach will continue through all the design stages, through to construction and celebration of construction as well. There'll be big parties for each of the projects.
We'll be expecting the invite. No, that's brilliant to hear that, because I know it has been a really sort of long engagement consultation process. So you must be excited to kind of finally be at a point where that sort of part in the process is coming to an end, and then you can look to actual implementation and actually seeing the proposed measures and changes come to life. Brilliant, thank you so much, Dan. We're now going to move on to the next part of our session. So we are going to kick off again with a quick poll. Zara, if you want to share the screen again, so we have our question on there. The poll is just coming into the chat now. Let's send this in. So if you want to quickly just vote on that. And then Zara is going to be talking us through some of the ways that businesses can plan for resilience. So we've heard sort of the approach that the Fitzrovia Partnership have taken with the support of Placemaking London. But now we're sort of shifting that focus to you as businesses individually. How can you make your businesses more resilient, and how can this fit within your current structures and environmental policies and so on? Okay,
Perfect.
so I
Thanks,
think
Abby.
resounding yes there with the responses, which is great.
Yeah, really good to see. Give it a couple seconds, see if anyone else wants to jump in, and then we'll move swiftly on. Okay, so based on the chat, most of you guys will have considered these, but yeah, I just wanted to highlight some of the changes that we have already seen and will probably continue to see as we go forward, and how that might impact your businesses and ways of working. So one of the key ones is obviously the increased summer temperatures. We've already kind of discussed about how this can impact travel, so people kind of getting in to work, whether or not that's down to, you know, railway lines and things not being able to run as effectively as they normally are. Could it be anything from difference in working conditions, if it's kind of too hot, the productivity of the employees, kind of what impact that's going to have, increased energy costs if you're having to implement more cooling measures that you wouldn't typically have in place, and yeah, just the higher demand or impact on supply chain potentially. Again, with reduced summer rainfall, depending on what kind of industry you're in, that definitely has a widespread impact on things like agriculture and farming. And then again, like we mentioned earlier, the water supply and kind of the availability and usage, which can impact businesses in a variety of different ways. And then flooding, which we are kind of seeing a bit more regularly down to the short intense rainfall. So obviously our rainfall is over summer decreasing, but we do have these kind of really flashy events which tend to cause localized flooding across Camden. Again, that can impact kind of travel of staff, damages to commercial properties, and yeah, kind of an impact on trade patterns, I suppose, following a flood. So all things that need to kind of be taken into consideration within the context, I guess, of your own business. I'm sure we've got a wide variety, so they might all be slightly different, but that's just some of the initial considerations. A little bit on kind of why you should think about this, and it's really good that you guys on the call are already doing this. But I think in terms of the benefits, one of the key ones would definitely be cost saving. If you kind of implement these forward thinking measures now, the kind of the benefits that you'll receive in the future are going to be a lot higher than kind of reacting as these events come forward. Business continuity, so just making sure that no matter what kind of goes on with these events, that you're just constantly under kind of operation, and that's not fluctuating too much, not having to kind of close up and kind of bring things to a halt. Competitive advantages, so exploring the opportunities, reducing your costs, and just making sure that you're managing the risks effectively, particularly if other businesses on. I mean, that can give you a bit of an advantage there, and reputational benefits as well. So just making sure that your brand is being seen in kind of the most positive way possible, and really gaining confidence from your clients. So just a few planning considerations. You guys might have others, and if you do, please feel free to pop them in the chat. But a few that we just wanted to highlight to kind of think about your risk profile is the flexibility of work arrangements. It might be something that you guys can or can't do depending on what your business is, but can you kind of adjust that if people can work from home, whether or not people can go out on site if that's part of your role outside of peak heat times, that kind of thing. Just trying to keep people as comfortable as possible during these kind of extreme periods. Business premises, like how are they responding? Are they made for these events? Like, have we got aircon? Or is there anything that you can kind of do to minimize the risks, especially again from flooding? Diversifying the supply chain just to make sure, you've got that continuous business during these events. And then again, thinking about the financial impacts if you were to come under stress by any of these events, which hopefully you haven't so far and will continue to kind of be prepared for. So just a bit of kind of context, especially around kind of the way that we're viewing understanding risk within Camden. So we've kind of taken the approach of the risk boils down essentially to three main factors. So you've got the hazards, which we spoke about earlier, so the kind of changes, the increased rainfall over summer, the increased temperature. Then you've got the vulnerability, so kind of looking at your situation and the surroundings that you're in, and then also the exposure, and kind of matching these all together builds up a really nice picture as to what your risk level might be. And it might be that for heat waves and overheating, you kind of have more vulnerabilities, so the impacts are going to be higher, but might be for flooding, you're like kind of not within any area. So it's really worth having to think about, if you haven't already, what your hazards and risk vulnerabilities are going forward. This will be shared later on, so just got some resources, some from kind of government publications which have been recently updated, and there's also a really interesting toolkit which is from Queensland. So again, they're obviously an area who has to deal with things like overheating quite largely, but they've also got kind of flood risk and things, and they've got a really nice business toolkit, so that might be worth checking out and seeing if there's anything you can pull out of that. Before we kind of close up and do any final questions, I just wanted to highlight kind of some key takeaway points. It's been kind of a bit of a whistle-stop tour on climate resilience and what businesses can and are doing. So I just wanted to kind of highlight what we've been through already. Like Abby said earlier, net zero alone isn't going to kind of save the planet, unfortunately, although that was the goal. So what we need to do now is kind of net zero plus. And I think this was a quote from Emma Howard Boyd, previously chief of the Environment Agency, and the plus is that adaptation and resilience side of it. The risk of climate change, as we have seen over recent years, is increasing, and yeah, the adaptation and mitigation will really need to be responding fairly urgently. Point 3, Climate Resilient Camden will definitely include all of you guys and wider organisations to kind of just prepare yourselves and kind of help us navigate how we can support you as well in the coming years with these climate risks. Understanding your business now will definitely better help protect you in the future. So trying to kind of implement where you can will definitely have that positive benefit that we've just spoken about. And finally, just kind of together that, you know, we can build this climate resilient borough, allowing businesses like yourselves, residents, communities, visitors, all to kind of thrive within our borough. And I think that's really important. This is a major opportunity, is how I'm kind of framing the whole resilience. It's a way for us to redesign what we see our borough as, and your input as businesses is really valuable. So yeah, kind of the key takeaway points there. And I think that's us. So we'll kind of finish off. We've got a couple of minutes for any questions, whether that's to myself around the Camden stuff, whether it's around the Alliance to Abby, or again, if you've had any additional questions for Dan, we can do that now.
Thanks, Sarah. That was a great presentation. Thank you for sharing sort of highlighting those really important things that businesses can sort of take away from this session and think about if they haven't already been thought about already. I don't know if we do have any questions for Zara on the sort of Camden resilience side. Please feel free to unmute or drop something in the chat. We did have a couple of extra questions that came through for you, Dan, if you're happy to take those now quickly. So one of the questions was around, during the engagement with the community, what percentage felt positive for the strategy to be implemented?
The straight answer is I don't know, because we didn't ask, we didn't collect those quantitative measurements. So it was really about engaging on exactly what people would like to see in the area. So it was qualitative engagement, but we certainly touching wood because the consultation is still open, but everyone's been very, very positive and wants to, because it's a co-design approach and it's a listening approach and taking everybody with us. So I mean, that's the only way to make sure that change is delivered and the community goes with us on it.
Brilliant, thanks, Dan. And then the second question was around, really interesting question that came through from Lexi actually, and she says, do the plans incorporate regenerative and recycled materials / construction to keep carbon minimized during the actual implementation and install phase?
Yeah, it will do, and that's, you know, a very, very specialist area, and both the construction industry and local authorities are really leading on this in terms of choice of materials, where the materials come from, the construction approach, how everything is powered. So you know, there's a lot that's going on in that space. And what I would add to that is, sometimes, is there an easier option? And I use the example of Portobello Road. You know, it's a very busy place every Saturday, but its public realm is awful actually, and it doesn't make a difference. People go there for the experiences, how that space is allocated. So I think what we're increasingly doing at Placemaking in London is say, okay, who has access to that space and how is it used, more so than how it is designed and constructed. So sometimes it's better for the environment to not construct a new scheme at all.
Definitely agree. Thanks so much, Dan. So we are nearing the end. We've just dipped over 1 minute over. I just wanted to finish with one more poll, which I feel like I probably know the answer to based on our answers throughout. So there is one final poll to round off the session, which has just gone into the chat, and that is, Do you feel you understand what climate resilience is, and would you feel confident having these resilience discussions internally, be that with colleagues, senior management team, and looking at how that's actually incorporated to your existing strategies? As I say, I feel like we kind of know the answer to this, and seeing some strongly agrees come through, which is really, really great to see following this session. Whilst that's still those votes are filtering through, I just want to say a huge thank you to Dan for joining us today and talking us through the Fitzrovia Village Strategy, and also to Zara for bringing the insights from a Camden side. It's been really fantastic to hear those, and I really hope it has been a helpful session for everyone on the call today. Lots going on London Climate Action Week, but hopefully a great space for us to learn and sort of take things away to sort of implement and move forward. So yes, a huge thank you for joining today to you all on the call, and we'll be sharing the slides following this session, and I'll also include Dan's details there, because I know there was a couple of questions that were coming through and a couple of queries around potentially sort of sharing knowledge on certain projects going across on different areas. So it'd be great to link everyone up, given that we all need to be collaborating and working on this together. So I will leave it there. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of the London Climate Action Week.
Thank you, everyone.